Okay, in this video, we're now going to look at the Copilot beta chat feature. This is available if you're using Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio. I'm in VS Code, so I can use this feature. Let's take a look at this now. Now, depending on what you want to do, there are various ways to interact with chat. The first, as you can see in a blank file, is you get this line across the top that says, use the hotkey Control-I, which works for me on Linux, to ask Copilot chat to do something. I could use that hotkey, and then I would get a chat pop-up box. Alternatively, I have this option down here in the icons on the left. If I click on this, it opens up a chat window, which looks a lot like ChatGPT if you've ever used that, and I'm sure you have at this point. As you can see, it addresses me using my GitHub login name, and then it gives me this entrance here to say it's powered by AI, surprises and mistakes are possible, verify any generated code or suggestions, but ultimately the idea is that you can type into this box at the bottom whatever you want, and it will then interact with you. Let's do both just to get started. We'll start by using this box, and let's ask a question. How about we ask something really basic? Let's assume that you're brand new to programming and you don't know what an array is. You could say this. What is an array? Question mark. It says it's thinking, and let's wait for its response. And there you go, we now get a response. Let's take a look at what that response says. An array is a data structure that stores a collection of elements, each identified by an index or a key. The elements in the array have the same data type and are stored at contiguous memory locations. Arrays are commonly used in programming to store and manipulate collections of data. That seems like a reasonable explanation of what an array is. I think that's a decent starting point. Of course, you could make the argument if you're working something like Python, that a Python list is an array because it's a dynamic C array under the hood, and it actually has different types of elements, different data types. But you can get the general idea that you can use this to interact with Copilot to ask general programming questions. You could do the same thing if we clear this off for a moment. I'm going to hide the chat box. Let's come over here and let's use the hotkey, Control-I. Now we get a pop-up box, and you can see I could do the same thing here. I could ask a question and see what it replies to me. In this instance, when you're in the main coding window here, it's better to use this to actually get some help with coding. So let's look at a classic example. Let's say I'm learning to code and I want to create a binary search algorithm. This is one of the classic algorithms that you learn when learning to code, and it's also something that comes up often in programming interviews. If you have a sorted array of values, you would use binary search as a great way to search this for a value. So let's take a look at how we can use the Copilot chat feature to help us generate a function for binary search. Let's say the following. Can you help me generate a function for binary search? I'm going to hit enter and let's see what it does. Fetching a response. Let's take our time and wait for that response to be generated, and hopefully we're going to see some code pop up in the window here. Just takes a moment to do it. And now we can see we have two options, accept or discard what we have. Let's take a look at the function that has been generated. If you're not familiar with binary search, the main concept is that you have a midpoint of the array and you're looking to see whether the target value you want to find is to the left or the right of the midpoint, or maybe it already is the midpoint. But the general premise is that you keep dividing your space either to the left or right, depending on whether the value is less than or greater than the midpoint, and you keep pincering in to find the value you're after. You will either find the value or it will not be in the array, and in this case, we won't return the value. You can see in this example of the binary search algorithm that it seems to be doing a return of -1 when it cannot find the actual value in the array. That seems fair to me. Returning -1 indicates that it is not there because -1 is not an index in an array. Because you can see we are returning the actual index from this function. This seems like a really great example of using Copilot chat to generate a function from scratch by just asking a question. So I could hit accept, and then I would have that code in my file. Isn't that great? I've now generated code by working with Copilot chat. That's great. This is a fantastic introduction to using this really interesting feature. As you can probably tell, this is a lot like working with something like ChatGPT, because of course Copilot is built atop the OpenAI codex, so it's a similar premise. And when you're using Copilot chat, you're actually interacting with a large language model, which is the same as ChatGPT, but we're focusing specifically only on coding. If you try to ask questions that are random and not related to coding, why would you be doing that in this anyway? I don't know. You will not be getting the responses you're looking for. Copilot chat is here to help you with coding in whatever language you want to work in. Okay, so what else could we do here? We want to work with Copilot chat. How about I hit Control-I again to bring up the chat? There we go. I now have the chat box, and I can say the following. Could I refactor this algorithm to use recursion? That seems like a reasonable question. Let's see what it says when I hit that. It's fetching a response and it's thinking about it. It's thinking about it. Sometimes it takes a moment to think about it. That's okay. We just sit here and wait patiently for its response. And here you go. We now have a suggestion for a different algorithm. And interestingly, you can see it's trying to use something like a git diff approach, where it's using red and green to indicate what's new and what's different. You can see the minus symbols show what's been taken out, and the plus symbols show what's been added. So you can see the difference between these two functions. This is a great way for you to learn what the difference is between a recursive version of a function and a standard version of a function, because you can assess and study these two versions of the algorithm and see where the differences lie. So if you're brand new to something like recursion, this could maybe help you to figure out what's actually going on here. So I really like this. If you're a student or you're a beginner developer, using GitHub Copilot chat here can help you to not only generate code that is maybe stretching your own abilities, but you can look at things like this to understand where that comes from. Now, for the sake of this example, let's just discard that for right now, and let's take a look what we've got here. Let's go back to the chat window to see how we can interact with the chat. Now we're over here. Maybe we could write something in here to ask whether it could help. Maybe I'll type the following. Could you generate a doc string for the binary search function? Let's see what it does. Just thinking about it. Sure, here's a possible doc string. And as you can see, it's now generated this for us. That's really, really interesting. Let me know if you need anything else. Great. So if we wanted to, we could simply copy this over and we could then paste it into there. That's really cool. Now, what if we wanted to do something else, like work out the time complexity, which is what it's saying here? We could click on this and it would tell us what the time complexity is of the binary search algorithm. So you can see that it's starting to think about other questions you may want to ask based upon the topic you're talking to it about, which is really interesting because that way you can essentially push your own knowledge by interacting with chat to look at these different features of the code that you're working with. Okay, let's try something else. How about we now move to another classic algorithm for beginner programmers, and let's ask GitHub's Copilot chat if it can help us with the bubble sort. About this. Can you help me to write the bubble sort algorithm? Let's see what it does. Give it a moment. It's thinking about it. Sure, here's implementation. Great. There we go. We now have an implementation of bubble sort. That's great. Now, if we hover over this, look what we have here. We have some options. We can simply copy, or we can insert the code and cursor. So if I come over here and place the cursor here, then I come over here and click on this, code just appears in my file. That's fantastic. So you can generate code using the chat box on the left here, using this chat box, as opposed to using the chat box here via the pop-up. And you can get your code in by simply using that shortcut. That's brilliant. So now we've been able to see multiple ways of interacting with GitHub's Copilot chat. Now, one of my favorite things about this is that it keeps you inside your IDE. You're working in the editor all the time, not having to flip off to Google or the ChatGPT or Stack Overflow to look for answers and information. You can just do it all inside your IDE, which means you can do more coding. You can get more involved in the coding process, which I think is essential to actually learning. I also love these suggestions for extra questions you could ask. I like that it asks you to ask about the time complexity. Then you can learn about that. Explain the difference between bubble sort and selection sort. There's a way for you to learn about classic algorithms that come up a lot when you're learning about data structures and algorithms, and things that you will want to learn as you're progressing on your journey to becoming a professional developer. So overall, what I think is great is that GitHub's Copilot chat keeps you inside the IDE. You can interact with it, ask general questions about coding. You can get coding help. You can get code-generated snippets, copy them in. You can play with them. You can tweak them. You can ask for help with refactoring. It will show you the difference between one and the other, which was what we did when we looked at binary search, looking at the standard and the recursive version. There's a lot more that you can do with this, and the more you play with it, the more you'll discover. Generally speaking, like anything else with Copilot, obviously you have to always be willing to do a bit more looking around in case something doesn't seem quite right. And this is one of the challenges, especially for beginners, because you will take everything that's provided to you on face value and assume it's correct. Now, that can be one of the tricky parts about using any type of search, whether that's Google, whether you're using Stack Overflow or ChatGPT for help in learning about coding. Are they giving you the correct answers? And this is challenging. Sometimes you've got to refer to very great sources of truth, like solid books or really good courses, to make sure that what you're learning actually lines up with what is correct. But in general, using this as a tool to assist in your learning or to assist in learning more about what you're trying to code or to get help with what you're trying to code is a really great feature. And I think that having it all inside the IDE really is one of the strengths, because it means you get to stay inside here and spend more time getting the coding into your fingers rather than having to jump in and out of the IDE, going to a search of some kind, whether it's Stack Overflow or Google, trying to make sense of something, etc., etc. So I think it's a great feature, and I think you should really take advantage of it if you have a Copilot subscription and you're working in VS Code or Visual Studio. That's now bringing us to the end of this video. Of course, everything we've done here, feel free to play around with it yourself, mix and match, When you're using Copilot chat, you could come in here and write some comments out as prompts to try and get it to do refactoring. You could start writing your own code using auto completions. You could look for some test cases. You could then interact with chat to ask how you could improve your test cases, etc., etc. Mixing and matching and slicing and dicing all these different techniques of working with Copilot is how you get the very most out of using it as your own AI coding assistant, or as I like to think of it, as my own AI-powered intern. And I hope you've enjoyed this video series and that you'll enjoy using Copilot to level up your coding and to get yourself being even more efficient when doing your coding. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.